June 24, 2007. A home in Fayetteville, Georgia, stands silent beneath the oppressive summer heat. Inside its walls lies a scene no one could have anticipated. 3 lives extinguished, each in a way that whispers of meticulous intention. The faint hum of a ceiling fan fails to mask the unsettling clues left behind. A bound figure, an untouched Bible, unanswered questions. A man celebrated for his talent and discipline has left behind a legacy of devastation. What could drive someone adored by millions to such an unspeakable end? Welcome to True Crime Theater HQ. Chris Benoit was more than just a name in professional wrestling. He was a force of nature. With unmatched intensity and an unwavering dedication to his craft, he carved his way into the hearts of fans around the globe. Born in Canada, Benoit was the kind of athlete who didn't just wrestle. He performed as if every match was a matter of life and death. His fierce style and signature moves earned him the moniker, the Rabid Wolverine, a tribute to his aggressive, unyielding approach in the ring. For him, there were no shortcuts, no compromises. Every punch, every suplex, and every victory told the story of a man pushing his body to its absolute limits to maintain excellence. But to those who knew him beyond the bright lights and roaring crowds, Benoit was a different man. At home with his wife Nancy and young son Daniel, he was soft-spoken, attentive, and deeply devoted. Friends and colleagues spoke of his adoration for his family, the way he'd light up when discussing them or sharing stories from their lives. There was kindness beneath the tough exterior, a side reserved for those he held closest. To fellow wrestlers, he was as dependable as they come, punctual, professional, a mentor to some and a trusted confidant to others. Benoit wasn't just a performer, he was an artist. Every move, every match was choreographed with precision, a blend of athleticism and storytelling that left audiences in awe. He wasn't a larger-than-life personality like some of his peers. What made him stand out was his authenticity. Fans didn't cheer for Benoit because of flashy promos or over-the-top antics. They cheered because he was real, a man who earned their respect through sheer grit and determination. Still, the line between his two worlds, the relentless gladiator in the ring and the gentle family man at home, was razor-thin. For years, he managed to walk that tightrope, excelling in one of the most physically demanding careers imaginable, while maintaining the image of a doting husband and father. But as his career soared, the cracks began to show. Balancing a grueling wrestling schedule with the emotional and physical toll it inflicted wasn't just difficult, it was nearly impossible. And yet, he pushed forward, determined to live up to what was expected of him in all aspects of his life. For fans, Chris Benoit was nothing short of a hero. He was the underdog who overcame adversity, the quiet warrior who never ceased to amaze. But even heroes are human, and the pressures building behind the scenes told a different story. A story far more complex than the one unfolding in the wrestling ring. Professional wrestling is often called a spectacle, an intricately staged performance of scripted storylines and larger-than-life personas. Yet beneath the glitz and relentless energy, the reality is anything but theatrical. For wrestlers like Chris Benoit, it's a career that demands everything and gives little back in return. The road is long, stretching from one city to another, with no real sense of a home base. Wrestlers spend the bulk of their year away from their families, shuttling from airports to arenas to hastily chosen hotels. Days blur into nights as they live out of suitcases, fighting sheer exhaustion to keep up with punishing schedules that are as unrelenting as the physical pain they endure. The matches may be scripted, but the bodily damage is very real. Years of collisions, falls, and high-risk stunts leave tendons strained, bones cracked, and muscles torn. Painkillers become as common as water, and injuries that would sideline other athletes are often ignored, treated like minor inconveniences. For Chris, this wasn't just a job, it was survival. And survival in professional wrestling means staying relevant. The industry moves fast and forgets faster, rewarding only those who can keep the crowd's attention, no matter the cost. Wrestling wasn't just his passion, it was his identity, and preserving that meant continually pushing himself to the brink. Yet the pressure to perform wasn't confined to the arena. Chris wasn't just competing against his fellow athletes, he was competing against time, against the slow decline of a body worn down by years of grueling matches. Every bump, slam, and chair shot seemed to take a little more out of him, but the greatest battles aren't always fought in public. Offstage, Chris grappled with isolation and the emotional toll of a life spent chasing perfection. The death of his best friend and fellow wrestler, Eddie Guerrero, in 2005, dealt him a blow from which he never truly recovered. Eddie had been more than a friend. He was a brother in arms, someone who shared the unique highs and lows of their chaotic profession. Losing Eddie left an emptiness in Chris's life, one that seemed to grow with each passing day. Those who knew him described a man who became quieter, more withdrawn, as if a part of him had left with his friend. With 2 days left to spare, Chris escaped from the hospital and went directly to see these struggles, a relentless schedule, mounting injuries, and the shadow of profound grief were invisible to the cheering crowds who celebrated his victories. But, like a fissure hidden beneath a stable surface, the pressures were there, growing, threatening to consume him. Wrestling may have been his lifeblood, but it was also an unyielding master, demanding everything he had to offer, and more. June 22, 2007. For most of his life, Chris Benoit had been the embodiment of discipline. Missing a flight, especially one leading to a crucial WWE event, was impossible to imagine for the man known as the consummate professional. But that Friday was different. Benoit, uncharacteristically absent, left colleagues bewildered, and there was no explanation, no last-minute rush to catch the plane. He simply wasn't there. When he finally did make contact, it wasn't to reassure. Speaking to Chavo Guerrero, his voice was off. It was distant, a shadow of its usual grounded tone. He spoke of Nancy, his wife, vomiting blood, a disturbing claim, and one that immediately struck Chavo as bizarre. But it wasn't just what Benoit was saying. It was the way he said it. There was a strained warmth to his words, an emotional intensity that was out of character. He ended the call with something as heartfelt as it was haunting. "I love you." The sentiment, while kind, wasn't the kind of thing Benoit would casually say to a colleague. Something was wrong. Everyone sensed it, but no one quite knew what. By Saturday, his behavior had grown even more erratic. Messages began to surface. Voicemails that were disjointed, scattered, yet distressingly deliberate. Then, early Sunday morning, as a dark stillness hung over the sleepy suburb of Fayetteville, Georgia, Benoit sent out a series of text messages that would linger in the minds of his friends like a bad dream. One message was startlingly mundane. It listed his home address. Another note described where the family's dogs had been locked up and mentioned an open garage door. There was no context, no explanation. The observations were ordinary, yet deeply unsettling in their simplicity. Why was he sending these details? And why, at 3:51 a.m., when most people were asleep, did they arrive? Those closest to Benoit tried to rationalize the strange messages. Fatigue, stress, caring for his reportedly ill family, any of these might explain his behavior. But rationality felt like a stretch when faced with the series of cryptic, unnerving signs. The calm before a storm has a way of fooling even the most observant into thinking they're imagining things. But this calm wasn't quiet. It was deafening, and beneath its surface, something far more troubling was taking hold. June 25, 2007. It began as a routine welfare check, a knock on the door of a quiet suburban home in Fayetteville, Georgia. The officers expected maybe no answer, perhaps a family away on a brief trip. Instead, when they stepped inside, they found themselves engulfed in a scene they would never forget. The air was oppressively still, thick with a silence that seemed far too heavy for an ordinary home. Room by room, the nightmare unfolded. Nancy Benoit was discovered first. She lay in an upstairs bedroom, her body bound at the wrists and feet, a blood-stained towel beneath her head. Investigators concluded she had been strangled, face to face, in an act marked by its brutality and finality. A Bible rested neatly beside her, an unsettling detail that spoke to a deliberate forethought. Then came Daniel, Chris and Nancy's 7-year-old son, found lifeless in his bedroom. His small, motionless figure told another grim story. He had been suffocated, his death painfully silent, and perhaps, one can only imagine, a betrayal of the trust every child places in their parent. Like his mother's, a Bible was placed near his body. A quiet, methodical pattern was beginning to emerge, one that only amplified the horror. And finally, there was Chris. The story came to its grim conclusion in the home gym. There, amidst the iron weights and worn-out equipment, they found the man himself. He had hung himself using the cables of a pulley machine, ending his own life after taking the lives of his wife and son. His journal later revealed fragments of despair, grief over Eddie Guerrero, cracks in his psyche, but no real answers, only echoes of his crumbling mind. The house was no longer a home. It was a portrait of devastation, a mother taken violently, a child robbed of his future, and a father shrouded in questions that would haunt loved ones, investigators, and the world for years to come. Bibles beside each body, carefully placed, left behind something no words could quite explain. It wasn't chaos, it was calculation. A chilling detail that turned a crime scene into something even more incomprehensible. What could drive a man to destroy the very people he claimed to love? What unseen demons had pushed Chris Benoit to orchestrate such a harrowing tableau of loss? The discoveries raised more questions than answers, a void that no investigation could fully fill. But one thing was certain. What happened in that house would leave a scar far deeper than anyone could have imagined. Chris Benoit's internet search history offered a glimpse into a mind unraveling. It wasn't the frantic typing of someone caught in a moment of rage or confusion. No. The searches were deliberate, methodical. A sobering testament to planning, not impulse. Among the chilling queries were phrases like, "How to break a neck," and "How long does a body take to decompose?" These weren't idle curiosities. They pointed to a forethought that was cold and calculated. A purposeful march toward an unthinkable end. Each search painted an unsettling picture, revealing the depth of Benoit's state of mind. Behind closed doors, in the quiet hum of an otherwise ordinary computer screen, the battles he fought in his own head played out in real time. What kind of turmoil drives a man to map out the destruction of his own family? Was it a desperate attempt to control a life slipping from his grip? Or was it the result of years of emotional erosion, injuries, and unspoken demons taking their toll? The timing, the details, the sequence of events. It all pointed to a man who had methodically constructed his actions long before they were carried out. These weren't random bursts of violence. They were pre-designed, as if Benoit had made peace with the horrors he planned to commit long before the world even understood they were possible. It was a stark contradiction to what friends and fans believed of him, adding yet another layer of unease to an already incomprehensible tragedy. And then there was the question of his psyche. Was this the result of emotional suppression, a life lived under the immense pressures of fame, grief, and physical pain? Or was there something darker, an irreparable fracture that no one could have seen, much less stopped? The internet searchers left behind an indelible scar, not just for what they exposed, but for the realization that the act was never a momentary lapse. It had been planned, calculated, as if every step had been rehearsed in his mind long before it was enacted. For those who knew Chris, those who had cheered for him, worked alongside him, and loved him, this discovery was perhaps the hardest to accept. It wasn't just that he had committed these acts, it was that he had prepared for them. And in that preparation, the line between the man and his demons blurred entirely, leaving behind only questions that no search engine could answer. Years of punishing battles in the wrestling ring had left Chris Benoit broken in ways that were not immediately visible. The hits he endured, countless chair shots to the head, flying headbutts from the top rope, and unrelenting physical punishment had taken an unimaginable toll. While his body bore the scars of his craft, it was his brain that suffered the most profound damage. A slow, silent destruction that no one saw until it was far too late. When medical experts studied Benoit's brain after his death, the findings were staggering. The trauma he had endured over the years had left his brain deteriorated to the level of an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, was the name given to the condition. The devastating result of repeated concussions and blows to the head. The man once celebrated for his precision and determination had unknowingly been living with a brain ravaged by a disease that stripped away impulse control, heightening aggression and emotional instability. It couldn't excuse the horror of his actions, but it forced the world to reconsider what might have driven him to such a dark place. Benoit's toxicology report revealed another volatile layer to his unraveling. Elevated testosterone levels were a clear sign of steroid use, a common but dangerous practice in the wrestling industry. These substances, often used to maintain the superhuman physiques demanded of professional wrestlers, can amplify aggression and mood swings. Combining that with the damage CTE inflicted on his brain created a cocktail of instability, a storm that even Benoit himself may not have recognized he was caught in. Experts weighed in, shedding light on the undeniable links between CTE and acts of violence. Dr. Bennett Omalu, who famously exposed the dangers of repetitive head trauma in football players, stated that CTE can rob individuals of their ability to control their anger, fear, and anxiety. Over time, the condition creates chaos in the mind, often leading to devastating consequences. For Benoit, who had already been wrestling with personal grief and professional pressures, the effects of CTE could have exacerbated his mental state, twisting his thoughts in ways no one around him could fully understand. The culture of wrestling itself also played a role in this narrative. It was a world where recklessness was often celebrated, and performers were admired for their ability to endure the unimaginable. Benoit's signature moves, like the flying headbutt, had thrilled fans, but done irreparable damage to him year after year. Wrestlers were expected to get up after every fall, to persevere through injuries, and to put their bodies on the line for the sake of the spectacle. For Benoit, that meant sacrificing not just his physical well-being, but ultimately, his mind. The discoveries surrounding Chris Benoit's brain and toxicology were chilling not just for what they revealed about him, but for what they signified about the world of professional wrestling. His actions cannot be justified, and the tragedy he caused remains staggering. But peeling back the layers of his story, unraveling the effects of CTE, the role of steroids, and the crushing mental toll of his profession, forces us to confront a larger question. CTE. How much of what happened was Chris Benoit, and how much was the man wrestling had turned him into? The answer may never be clear, but the implications remain deeply troubling. When the defendants went to court, they were begging the judge to have them released from their violent fast. The cracks in Chris Benoit's world were not immediately visible, but they were there, widening with each passing year. While his body bore the brunt of his relentless profession, his emotional wounds ran far deeper and were far harder to mend. The loss of his best friend, Eddie Guerrero, in 2005, marked the beginning of a devastating spiral, from which Benoit would never recover. Pereiro wasn't just a fellow wrestler. He was Benoit's confidant, his brother-in-arms, someone who understood the pressures of a world where larger-than-life personas often concealed fragile souls. When Eddie's heart stopped, something in Chris seemed to stop too. Friends and colleagues recalled a man who had always been intensely focused, now moving through life in a haze of grief, never quite able to find his footing. And then there was the strain at home. Nancy, the woman Chris had once so ardently pursued, found herself in a volatile marriage. Her 2003 divorce filing painted a troubling picture, citing instances of domestic abuse. Though the proceedings were later withdrawn and the couple reconciled, rumblings of infidelity and financial disputes cast a shadow over the Benoit household, turning their home into a battleground of simmering tensions. Nancy's close friends described her as someone who deeply loved Chris, but had grown increasingly fearful of his temper, her once vibrant personality dimmed by an atmosphere of confrontation and unease. Even those outside his family began to notice a change in Chris. The man who had been a quiet but dependable presence in the locker room grew withdrawn, retreating into himself. His jovial conversations with colleagues gave way to silence. Testimonies from those who knew him spoke of an unshakable sadness that lingered behind his steely exterior. Fans saw the ferocity of his performances in the ring, unaware of the emotional storm ravaging the man beneath the persona. Perhaps it was the grinding weight of grief, or the fractures within his personal life, or even some combination of both that pushed Chris further into isolation. It's hard for anyone to carry so much pain, but for someone like Chris, so accustomed to enduring, to toughing it out, it seemed impossible for him to ask for help, or even to recognize that he needed it. He was a man locked in a private hell, hidden in plain sight. For all that Chris Benoit achieved, for all the moments of triumph and glory he gave to the wrestling world, he was still a human being, carrying the burden of extraordinary pain. A man who stood in the spotlight, but whose deepest struggles remained in the shadows. It doesn't excuse what happened, nothing can, but pulling back the curtain on his emotional turmoil reveals a person breaking under the weight of it all. A tragic figure whose complexity forces us to ask not just what he did, but why, and whether anyone could have seen the cracks before it was too late. June 25, 2007. The discovery of the Benoit family tragedy was a shock that sent ripples across the world. But as investigators worked to piece together what had happened in that Fayetteville home, an unsettling revelation emerged. One that raised more questions than answers. Hours before the police found the bodies, a chilling edit appeared on Nancy Benoit's Wikipedia page. It simply stated that she was dead. What made this even more bizarre was its source. The edit was traced to Stamford, Connecticut, home to WWE headquarters, a place intricately tied to Chris Benoit and his wrestling career. Coincidence? Or something far more calculated? Adding to the eeriness was the timing of the edit. It was posted in the early hours of the 25th, long before law enforcement had even conducted their welfare check on the Benoit home. Speculation ran wild. Could there have been someone with insider knowledge, a person who knew about the unfolding tragedy before the world did? Or was it an unimaginable twist of sheer coincidence? Internet sleuths started connecting dots while conspiracy theories flourished. Some pointed to the proximity to WWE, questioning if someone from within the organization might have known more than they were letting on. How disturbing to see these people who worked together, starting with a concealment. Others argued that it could have been a cruel hoax, an anonymous person testing the boundaries of what they could get away with. Aubry Ruse, 1771. The ramifications of this single edit were far-reaching. It added a shroud of mystery to an already unfathomable tragedy. The event wasn't just about a man and his family anymore. It morphed into something that felt darker, deeper. a puzzle full of missing pieces and dead ends. No conclusive answers have surfaced to this day. The edit remains an enigma, an unsettling thread in a story already woven with unthinkable loss. Was it an innocent coincidence, a sinister leak, or something else entirely? One thing is certain: the mystery of that Wikipedia edit continues to haunt anyone seeking clarity in a case that defies comprehension. The story of Chris Benoit is one that defies simple explanation. A tragedy woven from threads of pain, confusion, and unanswered questions. What truly drove him to commit such horrific acts? Was it the lasting effects of steroids and the unchecked culture of performance enhancement? The irreversible brain damage caused by years of punishment in the ring? Or the crushing weight of his personal losses and unresolved struggles? Perhaps it was all of these factors, or none of them. The truth, tangled in shadows, may never fully come to light. What is clear, however, is the tragedy's profound impact. For professional wrestling, it was a reckoning, forcing the industry to confront uncomfortable truths about mental health, physical sacrifice, and the unrelenting demands on its performers. For fans, it shattered the image of a beloved athlete, replacing it with a swirl of grief, confusion, and anger. Chris Benoit's legacy is one of contradictions, of triumph and torment, admiration and revulsion. It's a cautionary tale about the depths of human behavior and the devastating consequences of unspoken pain. His story reminds us how little we truly know about the battles others may be fighting, and how critical it is to address the warning signs before it's too late. What are your thoughts on the Chris Benoit tragedy? Could any of this have been prevented? We invite you to share your theories and comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us as we continue to explore the darkest corners of true crime.